So the title of this section is Americans Over There. This is going to be about when the United States joined World War I and we went over and actually started fighting on the ground. So we had been supporting the war for a while, but not directly. Like we had been just like selling stuff and giving loans for a while. But we finally decided to enter the war, and that has already been covered in a previous video about why we actually decided to do that. Um, and when we get there, when the US finally got there, the Allies were in very bad shape. German troops had occupied Belgium and part of France. The German Navy was destroying Allied ships because they were using unrestricted submarine warfare. And they were very difficult to fight against because we hadn't developed like the radar and the sonar like we have now. So we were almost undetectable. Russia was barely able to hold the Germans back. And so our first group of soldiers, even though we did actually start up the draft, but our first group of soldiers that was sent was called the American Expeditionary Forces. And here's a picture of them. And they were a volunteer group of soldiers that showed up on the front the very first. So actually, it was the United States entering World War I that ends up tipping the balance of power because up until this point, they were in a gridlock. The Americans were super proud of the American Expeditionary Forces. In fact, actually, American soldiers were also nicknamed the Doughboys, and here's a little advertisement about them. But there's a lot of different reasons that Google says they were called the Doughboys. Like some people say it was because of the brass buttons on their uniforms, which is funny because I can't even see any brass buttons here. But that they made them look like drops of dough. Some people said that it was because they had to march through like wet, soggy ground, and that was like dough. And some people said it was like the clay on the pipes that they would use to shine their belts. So I don't know for sure what the actual reason was, but they were nicknamed the Doughboys. And another massive problem for the Allies, like when the United States showed up, is that Russia had just gone into a revolution in 1917, and a group called the Bolsheviks, which were like hardcore communists, took over the government. And then the government was being led by a man named Vladimir Lenin, and he decided that the Russians couldn't keep involved in the war because they had their own things going on and they needed to get out. So Russia had been an important ally up until this point. And when they pull out of the war, this leaves the Allies in even a more difficult position. So when they pull out and leave the war, the Russians sign an agreement, a treaty with the Central Powers. It's called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and that officially ends their part in the war. So when the United States comes into the war, this is kind of what it looks like. So this is supposed to be a snapshot from 1916. So I couldn't find a map that was like from when the United States actually got involved. But here's what I got. So when Russia left, okay, so here's the front over here where Russia was. Russia leaves, and Germany, Austria-Hungary, they suspect the United States is going to come quickly after that. So they have now been freed up on this one front, and they want to concentrate all of their efforts on especially the Western Front right over here. So this is the Eastern Front by Russia, and this is the Western Front over here by France. So they have this massive attack on March 21st of 1918 right along the Somme River. I think that's right up here somewhere. And they bombard Paris with artillery. They just shoot it up so much. And they also are able to move that front line, which had been really difficult, about 40 miles, which is a lot because up until that point, it had really been gridlocked. But the problem was that the German soldiers got ahead of their supply lines. So that ends up making a bigger problem for them because they advance further into the territory, but now they don't have the supplies to take care of their soldiers. So that attack is going to cost the Germans about 250,000 soldiers. And actually, the Allies were close to that, although slightly lower. On April 9th, the German army starts a second attack against the British line in northwestern France near Belgium. So Belgium is going to be right here. So that's kind of where they were attacking. And they promised that they were going to fight to the end, and they were defeated by the British. So within 20 days of this massive attack, over 110,000 casualties were happening on both sides. Okay, so this is going to bring the United States to the war. So oops, didn't mean to go that far. Actually, maybe this will be a better map. Okay. So farther south, German forces are threatening to break through the thin line and march toward Paris. So they were trying to get right here to Paris. If you can see Paris right down here. Here's a zoomed in map down here. And when the United States showed up, the AEF is able to fight back, and we're able to gradually push the Germans back. So by the beginning of July of 1918, about 1 million U.S. soldiers and military personnel were stationed in France. By mid-July, the Germans launched their last desperate offensive at the Second Battle of the Marne, and both sides are going to have heavy casualties, but that last major offensive is going to be what takes Germany out, like, for good. And then the Allies are going to counterattack again in September. The first is mainly a U.S. assault, and they're defeated by the Germans at the Battle of Saint-Mihiel near the border of France and Germany. Let's see if that's on here. I don't think they put that one on here. Oops, not what we wanted. But by November of 1918, General Pershing, which was the leader of the American Expeditionary Forces, they had broken through enemy lines and were beginning to push the Germans back into where they had come from. And then the problem was that this was the main supply line for German forces. So this is also going to end up cutting their supplies. Further problems are going to be building in Germany, as Germany is going to have a lot of food shortages because they're sending all their food and supplies to the front lines. So within Germany, people are starving. So there's going to be food riots and strikes, and people are dying. You can see this cart loaded up with people. So all of that is going to, some more people like looking for food. All of that is going to bring about an armistice, an end to the war. So what happens is that Germany agrees to a ceasefire. Kaiser Wilhelm steps down from the German throne and he flees to the Netherlands. Germany becomes a republic. The Allied powers demand that Germany leaves all occupied territory. They had to surrender all of their weapons. They also had to accept the occupation of some of their territory by Allied troops, and all of this happened on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. So, just to summarize, the American Expeditionary Forces, the doughboys, show up. Europe is in rough shape. The Allies are suffering. Russia has dropped out of the war because they just had their own civil war and communists take over the country. A number of major attacks and attempts by Germany to take back and to win by using like overwhelming force and moving quickly. But they spent too much energy in these attacks, and the United States ends up being able to tip the balance of that power and finally forces an armistice in 1918.